Hello, and welcome to the second episode of the Motivation Podcast. My name is Sanne.
And I am Elina, and we are your hosts today.
Let's start the show.
I've been working every minute. Think I might have crossed my limit. I need help. I need advice. Listen to our podcast.
Today's episode is all about those who work too much. And for this topic, we have a very special guest with us, our friend Julius.
Hey, hi.
And thank you so much for coming today.
Glad to be here.
Before we start, would you like to tell the audience something about yourself?
Well, I'm Julius. I'm also a student at UCG, former American Studies student, part of the Kairos board, doing an internship, extra courses. There's a lot. In general, I'm heading towards studying philosophy, and that's what I want to do with my life. And I'm going to take it easy sometime soon, because for the past long time, I've been doing too much, as this podcast suggests.
So we immediately see your relationship with the topic today. You've been doing a lot. As we also know as your friends, you've been doing about double the amount of courses that anyone else around us has done. Why did you choose to take on such a challenge?
I don't know. I was like, this course looks fun, and this course looks fun, this course looks fun. And it really started in the first year of American Studies, my first bachelor. So that's before I started UCG. And I was like, all right, I'm doing a full study. It's supposed to be full time. But I got 6 hours of contact per week. And I was like, I could take another one. So I started UCG. But then a lot of the things were just kind of easy because they were first year courses, right? And from that point onward, I just started doing more and more and more and more. Until I couldn't anymore, and now I'm doing less and less and less, and it's really nice.
And would you say you've always been this motivated or hardworking?
Oh no, not at all. Back in high school, I was just going for the sixes. Even the first year of American Studies, I was just going for sixes.
Okay.
And I was like, I'm just gonna relax, play games, watch TV all day.
That's so interesting. When did that change?
I don't know, when I started UCG, and I was like, might as well do some more. And then it's also a way to just keep busy, if that makes sense. Because you just always go on with the next and the next and the next thing. So you never have to consciously stand still and focus on one thing. Because you never can, because you're always moving on to the next thing. Which was really nice, actually. But not good, but nice.
I understand, yeah. So I think before we go on interviewing you a bit more, I would like to say a couple of things about the topic today. So an easy way to explain why people might work very hard is just to say, well, they're very motivated. But this idea is way too simple, as we found in our research, because being motivated can mean many different things. And for some, it means that they enjoy what they do and that they purely enjoy it so much that they just work hard and spend a lot of time on it. But for other people, it might mean that they are under a lot of pressure, maybe from their parents, maybe even pressure of themselves. These people might even be afraid to make a slightest mistake, and that's why they do so much work. And to understand motivation a bit better, it's good to understand that there's no such thing as just being motivated, generally. You might be motivated in one situation and not motivated in another situation. And also there's research, and they identified 5 different types of motivation. And you can see it as sort of like a dimension, like a spectrum from one to the other. So yeah, I'll just quickly go through them so we have a bit of an image the research has found. So the first one, the lowest, in a sense, type of motivation is called external motivation. And this is when people do something because they expect a reward. So, for example, you get a cookie if you do your homework, and then you would say you're externally motivated. Then there's also something called introjected regulation or motivation, and this is when you basically do something because you have to do it. So in school, for example, you might do your homework because you have to do it, but not because you actually want to learn the thing that you're doing. Then there's identified regulation or motivation, and this is when someone does something because it's personally important for them, but it's still in order to achieve some sort of goal. So you might say, I really want to get into this Master of Philosophy, and for that I need to do this and this and this and this, and you might work very hard for that, so you get into that study. But then research says that this is not even the ultimate form of motivation, because the ultimate form is intrinsic motivation. And this is when you do something purely because you enjoy it, you feel like it benefits you, and you have determined your own goals. It's not something someone else put you up to, so it really comes from within. So yeah, that's a lot of information, but do you feel like you recognize yourself in one of these motivation types?
I think so, yeah. I would say I'm more a combination of two points on the spectrum.
Mm-hmm.
On the one hand, I do the things I do because I really enjoy them, especially pre-COVID times, like just going to a classroom, discussing concepts, discussing papers. It's a lot of fun for me. It's also why I want to go into academia, obviously. That's what I enjoy. But sometimes I like stand by it and just kind of wondering, like, if at some point doing all this work became something I have to do. If that makes sense. Because right now I have way less to do and I'm just plain depressed at times. Because I'm just like, okay, what do I do now? I gotta work. And then you start thinking, all right, but I'm kind of slacking at my work for some reason. And that just kind of keeps going and going and going. Well, if you're always doing more and more and more and more, you can just kind of run from it in a way. Because you don't really have time to stop and stand still with stuff. You're either doing work because you have to, because there's a deadline like 4 or 5 times per week, or you're doing fun stuff because you're just done with work and you're like, whew. And nowhere in there is like this little space where you can be like, okay, now I'm gonna look after me. And I think that might have happened somewhere along my journey where it turned from like the intrinsic motivation to this I have to do this type of motivation. But that could also be because of the COVID crisis, of course.
Yeah, of course. And it's interesting that you say that, because intrinsic motivation, of course, it's something that's very hard to achieve, and no one will always be intrinsically motivated for everything. That's insane. But two researchers, Ryan and Deci, they have kind of come up with this theory called self-determination theory. And they say that in order to achieve intrinsic motivation, you need these 3 psychological needs. So I'm just gonna talk about them really quickly and see maybe if you can identify if one of them shifted for you, which is why your motivation might have shifted a bit. So the first one is competence. So the feeling that you can do it, right? The task at hand, you're confident you can do it. And even though it might be hard, you still feel like you can figure it out. The second one is autonomy, which means that the task that you have to do or that you want to do has, well, a sense of your own responsibility, and it's also something that you set out to do for yourself. And the third one is relatedness, and this is really about feeling like you belong. So in the context where you might have to do some task, you feel like your work is valued by others and of course by yourself, and also that you kind of fit in with the people in that context. So would you say that something shifted in one of these 3 things, or not at all?
I think if any of them like significantly shifted, it has to be like relatedness. Because when I do work now, I definitely feel less related to what I'm doing. If I'm reading a text for an online class, it's just like, all right, I read it and I show up to the online class or not, and I just try to participate some way. But the connection between me and what I love doing is kind of gone, because you're just in a blackboard room and discussions really aren't the same in a blackboard room.
Yeah.
It's also that for me, the idea of just being around people really motivates me in and of itself. And I think that's also part of relatedness being gone now, because even though people are there, they kind of aren't if you're online.
Yeah.
Because there's just so much that's gone in like personality and like how people are and the ways you can interact with them. I remember a couple of weeks ago I had my first physical class again, and right away I like raised my hand as many times in those 2 single hours as like the rest of the class before that, so like the 5 weeks before that.
Yeah.
It's just, there's this feeling of being bound to what you're doing when you're actually working at the university, for example, that you just lose as soon as you go home and you have to do a perusal assignment, or if you have to go into breakout rooms. It starts to feel more like a duty rather than something you enjoy.
Yeah. So it really shifts from, I guess then you could say that this need of relatedness is really not fulfilled anymore, which makes it hard to be motivated for what you have to do. Yeah, I completely understand. And maybe, Sanna, did you experience the same thing?
Yeah, I would say so. Like the Blackboard lectures, they are really impersonal. You don't see anyone on the screen. You're just talking to like a wall almost. And I would say for me also the sense of competence kind of got disrupted in a way, because you don't get that feedback from people, so you don't really know if what you're saying is also correct. And normally you're really looking for those social cues as well. So I would say that that also really caused me at least to not really speak up in those lectures.
Yeah, I can also relate to that. I feel like in one way sometimes it's easier to have online lectures, especially if you're a bit more shy. But you can really just notice that people aren't invested as much, which just makes it really sad to hear the teacher ask something and no one answer, and you just it's not very motivating for you. So maybe let's go back a bit more to some basics about how much work you did in the last couple of years. Could you just kind of give an image of what you did, like how many courses, how many hours a day did you spend studying and stuff like that?
Okay. Officially at my peak, if I'd fill in all the credits I'd have to do, and every credit corresponds to the amount of work you have to do, I think I would be stuck working 7 days per week, 22 hours per day. So that was a lot.
Yeah.
I never actually made that, because for a lot of courses, things are rehashed, for example, or things are kind of easy to get into if you know how the theories work, especially in the humanities where a lot of things are connected and a lot of schools of thoughts kind of push the way things work to one direction or another. You can kind of hook in and join the discussion. Plus, a lot of my courses have had the benefit of being a course that ends with an essay rather than an exam. So if you have an exam for a course, you kind of have to pay attention for the whole way. You have to give your full 100%. While if you have an essay at the end, you can kind of read the text. And especially if you still have class, you can hook in using the lecture, join the discussion, and still have like a lot of valid points to say. And I think that's also the way I kind of got through all that work, because I prepped a little, which saved me a lot of time when compared to like the amount of time I had to do. And at that point on, I just went to the courses and just participated a lot, which helped me just get through it. And when it comes to the essays in the end, which usually also needs to take a lot of time, if you are used to having like 5 essays in 1 week, while before that also having like all these assignments, at some point you just kind of figure out how to write essays that teachers like in a very short amount of time. Because in the end, in the syllabus, there's almost like these check marks, these boxes you have to check, and if you get all of them, you're guaranteed like a 7 or like an 8. And I like writing, which also really helped. So because of that, I feel like I managed through it. But there are some things that always like kind of sting and come back, as Sanna may reckon from our internship. Work that has to be done routinely on your own is something that always like bites me. Things like a diary of an internship, for example, or for the CARS board, we'd have to keep track of all the events that we've had and write like a little reflection on all of them. That's currently my work for the summer break, for example. So work that just kind of goes on and doesn't have like this clear-cut stop.
Okay.
Kind of sits in the way of doing a lot of work for me.
So would you say you kind of live from deadline to deadline and kind of lose sight of the larger tasks? For sure. Yeah, it kind of reminds me of our last guest, Joel. He had very different problems and situations, but still he also kind of had the same thing of like being motivated just by these short-term deadlines. It's interesting.
Yeah, I have a question like related to this, because you're saying like you live by the short deadlines. Then you always kind of manage to get a 7 or something around. Then you kind of know what the teacher wants you to write. Yeah. But then do you also feel like you get something from the course? Like if you don't really engage as much with the readings and everything, like do you ever become like a full expert, or like you feel like you properly have learned everything that you were supposed to learn from the course?
I feel like it really depends on the course, but also has changed a lot in the way I view courses. So for me, when I go into a course, it's not like I'm going there to become an expert, as you say, on like, for example, myths that constitute nationalism, or on political philosophy or global justice. Because of the vast amount of course I've already done, I'm like, it's just one more course, who cares? So I just go in and I'm like, all right, maybe I'll find something in here that I can use. And I do notice that back in American studies, I had this more often than now at UCG because the courses are also very much connected. So I can also chip something out. But if I have a theory course, I tend to find like really useful stuff that I use later on. In my thesis right now, for example, I keep coming back to like singular text I found in course before, discussed in courses before, and that really helps. But no, I never really feel like I become an expert on the topic that I have class on. But I also feel like for a lot of classes, it's also not really the goal to make you an expert on something anymore. I felt that for some class, it was just, all right, here's an introductory course in your third year about mind and society, for example. And sometimes there's just courses I plain disagree with, and that becomes like my inner focus of the course. Like last block I had global justice, which is centered around the global justice debate. But the whole global justice debate is bollocks, because they ignore like some of the most important parts of global justice. So that was really unfortunate. And then instead of like focusing the course and trying to find out what the course is about, I just try to find like the ways to like kind of annoy the teacher with that and kind of push him to the limit and discuss it. But that too doesn't work so well in online environments.
I'm just wondering, like, you took so many courses, but why exactly? Because you're saying that even though you benefit from some information of every course, of course, but why do you put so much pressure on yourself to do the course? Is it just a way to tick off, to show that you can do it to yourself, to others? What's the reason behind doing it?
I don't know, like at the start of a block, I just go to the course list and I'm like, oh, this looks fun. And I just keep going, and I'm too stubborn to drop out of a course if it isn't fun. And that's what usually happens. And the pressure doesn't really come from the courses per se. Like the courses just make other things more prone to giving pressure. Say last year I had my bachelor thesis for American Studies. That was a big pressure point because it's like a really big important thing.
Yeah.
But the course at the same time, I didn't care about them. I could finish them and that was good enough. And if I'd only had the courses, I could just kind of just go through them and be like, okay, this is fine. I'd be very pressured around the exam week, but that's just like 1 or 2 weeks. So that's fine. I mean, this year was the same, like the board, the CARS board, also brought like a lot of these points where I suddenly really had to do a lot of stuff that was actually like impactful. And at those points, the pressure did go up, or at times where deadlines would intersect. So those are the points I do have the pressure. But aside from those small points, it's just like a lot of fun, as long as the classes are in real life again, of course. But still, discussing stuff, figuring out how things work, and just kind of listening to lectures is really nice.
So you do really enjoy it?
Yeah, I do actually enjoy it, for sure.
Well, that's good, that's good. But you do talk about some pressure points, right? Some moments where the stress becomes very intense. How do you deal with that at that moment?
It really depends. So I got my best friend, Otto, in the same room as me, basically. So whenever like pressure's getting really high, I'm just like, wait, after this I'll be able to play games with Otto, maybe get intoxicated in one way or another, and it's usually really nice. And that just kind of helps me go from point to point to point, and it's just really relaxed. However, what I'm trying to do right now is also kind of spacing those points of relaxation out to avoid getting to the point of pressure. However, it could also be that because you have those points of relaxation throughout your journey, you kind of end with a lot of pressure anyway. So that's unfortunate, but I think it should be all right. I don't know, I just try to cope it by, on the one hand, ignoring it, and on the other hand, just having fun at times, and that really helps.
Has it ever happened before that you didn't make the deadline, that you like weren't able to do what you had to do?
Last block I had a draft due, and I was like, no, I'm not doing this is freaking me out. So I sent an email and my instructor ignored it, so that was really unfortunate. But that's also the thing about doing a lot of courses. If you don't make one deadline, it's like,
Okay.
And I tend to not miss hard deadlines, which also really helps. Like, for example, for the thesis, we had the draft hand in, and I knew, okay, if I don't make the draft and instead take some time for me, that's okay. But now the big deadline is approaching. That's like something I really want to make, because I also don't want to get an extension. But I don't know, like, I also don't feel ashamed when I need an extension for something, because there are days where I also like have so many courses or so many classes that I just have to do one assignment at one point, and then I have another assignment due like 20 minutes after that, which obviously is impossible. So on those points, I'm like, okay, what if instead of handing it in at 5 in the afternoon, I hand it in at 12? Which is generally fine, because no instructor ever looks at like papers that were handed in like the evening. They have their own things to do. But I never really asked for like really long extensions. I extended my bachelor thesis last year by like a lot, but it was also because they were just handing them out because of the corona crisis, and I was like, might as well. But aside from that, not so much, no.
And do you feel like that short pressure is also what is keeping you productive then, in that sense?
Oh yeah, for sure. Just knowing that something has to be done really helps me with actually getting things done. If I have to write something that doesn't need to be done right now, but needs to be done like 3 months from now, I'm like, just 3 months from now, it's fine. But I also don't know how that works when I don't have the continuous pressure of doing other stuff, of course. Because that's what I've been used to. So I don't know how I function in a space where I only have like one thing due in like a bunch of months. And I'm really excited to figure that out.
Yeah, that would be very interesting to see for yourself. I
Yeah,
mean.
exactly.
Have you ever had to deal with academic failures? So not just missing a deadline, but actually failing a course?
Oh yeah, for sure. In my first year of American Studies, I failed a course, and that caused me to miss out on the honors college, which was unfortunate.
Ooh, yeah.
But the more unfortunate thing was the announcement of the results for the resit were right after the announcement of who got accepted in honor college, and I nearly doubled my grade after the resit. So that was really unfortunate. For the course I mentioned before, Global Justice, I didn't really get a good grade, but that was also like, it's kind of like a mech course anyway. And in year 2, for UCG, I had like a 5.6 for cognitive psychology, which I retook earlier this year at UCG. And they already have like the difference between what motivates me and what doesn't. Because at the original version of cognitive psychology I took, as both of you remember, I think, we were in like these big cinema halls, which just sucks. Like, that's not what education is supposed to be like, in my opinion. While for cognitive psychology this year, we actually had physical classes during COVID, so were really small classes, and it was really personal, really nice, really accessible yet important discussions, and that was just so much nicer of an experience. So I don't even regret like failing that course per se, or not failing it, but getting a bad grade.
So did you retake the course because of the grade or because of the content?
Because of the grade, because there's still like some honor in there, you know, that you want to restore to yourself. Like, I don't mind getting like a 6.8 or like a low 7, that's fine with me. But like a 5, I'm like, you can do that better. Plus I'm at the point where in my program form, even if I take the extra courses for my double major, I can cross out like all the low grades anyway. Which makes a lot of things way easier. Like, I believe for the last couple of courses I need to get like 2 to 3 good grades, and that's it. Yeah,
it's kind of like a buffer. You have so many courses that at some point it doesn't even matter like if you get a mediocre grade. Or so I would say generally you seem not to care like an extreme amount about grades. Of course you want to get a decent grade, but you're not like, I want to get 9s and 10s. Or no, not necessarily, but that's also because like if you have an 8 or a 9 or a 10, I don't feel like it makes too big of a difference. Like, I missed out on the Guff Award, for example, because my grades weren't that high. That's like, okay, that's one thing you miss, but you still have like so many other good things that you've done if you do extracurricular stuff too. So I'm like, And the way I look at it, no one at a place where I'm going to be employed, which is going to be universities, is going to be like, oh no, you got an 8 instead of a 10 for this random course about political narratives that you definitely can't promote. So it's also like, it doesn't matter that much to me. Like, I like having like a good grade that you can show off on my resume, of course, but it doesn't have to be like super duper duper good. If it also allows me to do like a lot of extra courses and it allows me to do a career sport, an internship, or whatever. Yeah. I think that makes sense, especially because you really do a lot of things because you're generally interested in doing these things. Like, otherwise it wouldn't be feasible, right? If you for sure not. So I guess it makes a lot of sense.
Maybe it's interesting to talk a bit about your study routines. Like, what does your day look like? How do you, because you were talking about taking more breaks and like spreading it more out. Like, what's your method? What do you do?
Okay. Back when I still took like a whole lot of grade courses, because this block I have my thesis, which I basically had to fully write this block, plus 3 courses, which is okay, that's doable. Especially, they're also like, I know you'll have like, the courses I'm taking right now are also like, they only got 2 hours per week. For only one I have homework, which is a perusal assignment.
Okay, yeah.
The other one is a lecture I don't attend because it's only breakout groups, which just fully frustrate me. And the other one is a physical seminar, which is really nice, and I just have to kind of skim the text before I join. So in that sense, I don't have this constant pressure that I had in last block, for example, where for a lot of courses I felt like students were basically teaching courses and the instructors were just kind of sitting back and being like, But anyway, back then, my routine would be like, okay, I have 2 deadlines on Monday, 1 deadline on Tuesday, and 2 on Wednesday, and I believe like 1 on Friday or something. So then I would just be like, all right, I'm first doing this, and I'm doing this, then I'm taking a break, then I'm doing this, freaking out about this, doing the next thing. And by the time I got through all my deadlines, I would just be tired and would just kind of relax all day. Well, now with the thesis, I'm like, okay, I gotta write a total of 10,000 words before this Sunday in some way. So I need to write something every day, basically. But when there's a moment in a day where I'm like, okay, it's 9 in the evening, sometimes it's even 7 in the evening, and I'm just feel like I'm done for today, I'm not doing too much anymore, then like, okay, now I'm gonna do fun stuff with Zoe, with Guido, with whoever, and just relax. And thus far it has been working. It's been, keeping the pressure off.
Mm-hmm.
But the problem with it is also that I'm anticipating I'm still gonna have to do like a lot of work in the next couple of days that I could have done in the time I was relaxing earlier. But then again, I also feel like even though you feel really productive after like working all night on something, if you actually look at the amount of time that you spend and the amount of work that you've done and the quality of the work, it's usually way less than you anticipate.
Yeah.
And
I
that's
agree.
fine for like a normal course, right? But for your thesis, you kind of want to take your time and actually produce something that's really nice.
Yeah. So do you feel like at those moments where you take a break, do you feel like you can fully relax because you have all those other deadlines like looming over your head?
Intoxication helps. Intoxication helps a lot. No, it's not that bad. But it's just like when you're spending a nice night, if you have good, nice people around you, it doesn't really matter what you do. Obviously, there's always like this little voice in your head that goes, thesis, thesis, thesis. But if you know by yourself, like I've done my work today, and what I've done is actually helping me in some way or another, then I have the peace of mind to be in the night like, okay, I'm good for today. This is enough. But sometimes I'm still like thinking about thesis in the evening. I'm like, damn, I should have done more work today. But I've also kind of accepted that if I'm at a point where I say, damn, I should have done more work today, that even like working from that point onward isn't really going to be that productive anymore. And just keeping that in mind does help me relax, even though I still have to do work. So that's really nice.
Yeah, it sounds good. I mean, for me personally, I haven't found that space yet where I can. Well, sometimes, I mean, I try to take breaks and like maybe take an evening off, but it's really hard for me. Like I would tell myself, you're not doing anything, and then I find myself behind my laptop working. So I guess, yeah, I should take your advice and try to do that too.
There's also like this feeling of just kind of being done at some point. And that's also what really drives me. Like if I work in the first part of the day and I'm like, I'm just done, then I'm not going to like force myself to do more because that's not going to make me happy in any way. And in the end, I think like something that really helped me is realizing that most instructors, not all, some instructors are just bitches. Pardon me, bleep that out. Either way, some instructors are just not that nice when it comes to things, but most of them understand that no matter what you're doing, your happiness, your well-being is better than a stupid piece of paper you get after 3 years. And as long as as long as I keep that in mind, I can always be like, okay, even if this goes wrong, can I always like send like an emergency email, be like, okay, things are not working out, things are not going too great, and usually it just works like that.
So you do reach out like if it's not going well. So.
Yeah, for sure.
And do you reach out to the teacher, or do you also reach out to your friends? Or?
Mostly to the teachers, yeah.
Okay.
Because my friends, it's like, yeah, they know I'm just kind of done with stuff at some point, or I'm just overworked. It also helps that Guido, my best friend, is like the most non-interested in stuff like that. That also kind of helps take your mind out of it. Because I can also imagine if you like work a lot, you look stressed, and then you go relax with your buddy, and he's like, hey, is everything okay? That also kind of like puts you back into the mindset again. While with this, like most of the time, I also reach out to him to do something fun, and he's like, oh no, I still gotta do this much work, and I'm like, please. And usually it kind of works out and we have a good time. So in general, that really helps with just kind of escaping from it all. And I honestly don't know how it really works, because I work and I play at the same place, like literally like same little area, but there is like this distinction somehow, and I don't know how it came to rise.
That's also really interesting how study places like can also affect your study motivation and productivity. So are you just able to tune everything out and just full on start working on something, or?
I've noticed recently that I do need some time to like boot up when I start working again. And it's not always the case. Like sometimes you sit and you're like, and everything's good. But there's a lot of times where I just have to slowly get going, and I write like 200 words in 2 hours. And I'm like, but I also read like a paper with it or skim a paper. So I get feeling I'm doing something. But at some point, I just get going and I get ready. And when it comes to tuning everything out, it is sometimes quite difficult, especially with like Guido sitting next to me. So if he's playing a game and I'm trying to work, I'm like, but I also have a tendency to just blast my ears out with music, which also really helps. These days, I try to move to different places more often. So I went to my grandparents the other week, for example, or to my parents, which are a place where I can work quite nicely, and also work in the evening, which isn't always the best, but when you're your parents, you're kind of being like spoiled anyway, so it's like you can work in the evening. Back when like university buildings were still like actively open, I would also just go to the university at 9 in the morning and you leave at like 10 in the evening and just be done with that and just work or go to classes all day, and of course like have a break in the canteen every now and then, but that also really helped being able to do that. And it did take me like a full year to kind of find a way to mix having your private space and your study space be in the same space.
I remember from our conversation like a while ago that you mentioned that part of the reason that you keep on doing a lot of courses was because like other people kind of have this expectation of you as well, that you do it. So you started doing it, then everyone saw you as the guy that does that, so you kind of keep on doing it. I'm wondering, is that still like, does it still feel the same to you?
I mean, of course, like I feel like in the UCG circles I'll always kind of be the guy who took way too many courses, especially like people who knew me. And on the one hand, that did create the expectation of every time I signed a course that it's like okay to add like more, but I don't feel like it really forced me to have more anymore. Okay, that makes sense. So it's more so that in a way it really helps too, in a way, because it kind of shows you that you can do it. Because if everyone knows you as the guy who does all this stuff, then for some reason you must be able to do all this stuff. So when you get to like the list of courses, you can be like, I can do that and that and that, and generally it works out. So there is like this reputation definitely does affect the way I look at the way I work, but it doesn't force me to do anything at all, I feel.
Okay, well that's positive.
But it's also because I have really nice friends.
So we have one final question for you. If you could give the listeners one tip for anything related to studying, motivation, writing your thesis, your golden tip, if you will, what would it be?
This is gonna sound really strange from someone who is almost like cramming everything in one space, but just take your time for whatever. If it means like taking your time to study a bit more, taking your time to relax at times, and just kind of slowly getting used to like this idea of having to take your time has really helped me, because it also works on like a bigger level. Of course it works on a day-to-day basis where you're like, okay, I can take my time to this, take my time to take some time off. But if you look at the grand scheme of things, it also means that in case things go wrong, you can always take just some more time doing what you're doing, be it extending your bachelor by half a year or falling back on the summer break where you can take all your time theoretically. Just being able to do that is the one thing I'd advise the listeners, to just take this break, just take your time and be conscious that it's okay to take longer if you have to.
That's very good advice. But thank you so much for joining us today and being so open about your experience.
I was glad to be here.
Yeah, thank you, Julius. And also thank you to all our listeners for tuning in, and hopefully we'll see you in the next episode of the podcast.